Welcome back to the life of Joseph, from trials to triumph. Just when it seemed like Joseph's life couldn't get worse, he finds himself in prison. But is this truly a setback, or part of a larger plan? In the shadows of the prison walls, what dreams will come to life? Who will enter Joseph's story to change everything? This chapter raises big questions and begins to reveal some surprising answers.
The prison was a world of shadows and echoes, a place where hope seemed to wither like a flower in the dark. The walls were slick with moisture, their cold surface glistening faintly in the dim light that filtered through narrow cracks in the stone. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a pungent mix of unwashed bodies, damp straw, and the sour tang of despair. Chains clinked with every movement, their metallic sound a constant reminder of captivity. Rats scurried along the edges of the room, their tiny claws scratching against the stone floor. The flicker of a single torch threw jagged shadows across the walls, each flickering movement making the space feel smaller, more suffocating. I sat with my back against the wall, my knees drawn to my chest, the cold seeping through my thin tunic. "Lord," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the quiet hum of misery around me. "Why am I here? I served you faithfully. I resisted temptation. Why have you allowed this?" The silence that followed was deafening, an emptiness that seemed to mock my prayers. Yet even in that stillness, a faint glimmer of his presence remained. It was not a voice or a sign, but a quiet reassurance that settled in my heart, a reminder of Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." As days turned into weeks, the initial shock of my confinement began to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve. I observed the faces of the other prisoners, men whose eyes held stories of defeat, anger, and regret. I realized that this prison was more than a place of punishment. It was a crucible, a place where God was refining me for something greater. Each morning, I knelt on the cold floor, my hands clasped tightly. "Lord, I do not understand your plan," I prayed, my words steady despite the turmoil within me. "But I trust you are with me, even here." Slowly, the despair that had threatened to consume me began to lift, replaced by a fragile hope that carried me through the long, unchanging days. As the days turned into weeks, the monotony of prison life began to weigh heavily on my spirit. Yet, amidst the shadows and despair, I resolved to make the most of my time. "Even here, Lord," I prayed each morning, "I will serve you." It was a small act of defiance against the hopelessness that sought to consume me. The prison warden, a man hardened by years of dealing with criminals, began to notice me. "Joseph," he said one day, his voice gruff but curious, "you're different. You don't curse the walls or lash out like the others." "Why?" I offered a faint smile and replied, "Because my trust is in God. He is with me, even here." Impressed by my demeanor, the warden entrusted me with small responsibilities. At first, I was tasked with distributing food, simple loaves of bread and bowls of gruel to the other prisoners. It was a thankless job, but I performed it diligently, seeing it as an opportunity to bring order to a place defined by chaos. As time went on, my duties expanded. I began organizing the daily routines, mediating disputes, and even offering a listening ear to those burdened by guilt or despair. "Joseph," a fellow prisoner said to me one evening, his voice trembling, "you give us hope. How do you stay strong?" I placed a hand on his shoulder and replied, "I trust in God's plan. He is with us, even in the darkest places." Through these acts of service, I discovered a renewed sense of purpose. The prison was no longer just a place of confinement. It became a place where I could bring light, however small, to those around me. Each evening, as I knelt in prayer, I thanked God for the strength to endure and the chance to make a difference, even within these stone walls. The warden's trust in me grew, and soon I was placed in charge of the entire prison. It was an unexpected position of responsibility, but one I accepted with humility. I knew that this, too, was part of God's plan, a step in a journey I was only beginning to understand. One morning, as the dim light filtered through the narrow cracks in the prison walls, I noticed two men sitting apart from the others. Their faces were drawn, their expressions clouded with worry. They were Pharaoh's cupbearers and bakers, men who had once served in the king's court, but now found themselves confined to the same darkness as the rest of us. I approached them cautiously, sensing their distress. "Why do you look so troubled today?" I asked, my voice low but gentle. They exchanged uneasy glances before the cupbearer spoke. "We've had dreams," he said, his tone hesitant, "but there's no one to interpret them." I sat beside them, the cold of the stone floor pressing against my knees. "Do not interpretations belong to God?" I said, my words steady with conviction. "Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer took a deep breath before recounting his vision. "In my dream," he began, "I saw a vine with 3 branches. As it budded and blossomed, its clusters ripened into grapes. I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in his hand." As he spoke, I felt a quiet assurance settle over me, a guiding presence that seemed to illuminate the meaning of his dream. "The 3 branches are 3 days," I said, meeting his gaze. "Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head and restore you to your position. You will once again place the cup into Pharaoh's hand, just as you did before." The cupbearer's eyes brightened, a flicker of hope replacing the despair that had clouded them. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice trembling with gratitude. I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "When you are restored, remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh so I may be freed from this place." The baker, who had been listening intently, shifted uneasily. "And I," he said, his voice wavering, "also had a dream. May I tell you?" I nodded, bracing myself for what was to come. I prayed silently for the wisdom to discern and the strength to deliver whatever truth God revealed. As the baker began to share his dream, a sense of foreboding settled over the room. Little did I know, the interpretation would carry both clarity and sorrow. The baker's hands trembled slightly as he began to speak, his voice unsteady. "In my dream," he said, avoiding my gaze, "I saw 3 baskets of bread on my head. In the top basket there were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but birds were eating them." He stopped, his breath catching as he glanced at me, searching for reassurance that I couldn't give. I bowed my head for a moment, silently praying for wisdom. The interpretation came swiftly, yet it brought with it a heavy weight. I looked into the baker's eyes, my own filled with compassion. "The 3 baskets are 3 days," I began, my voice steady despite the sorrow I felt. "Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat your flesh." The words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. The baker's face fell, his expression shifting from confusion to despair. His hands, which had been clasped tightly in his lap, fell limply to his sides. "Are you certain?" he whispered, though the question carried no hope. I nodded solemnly, my heart aching as I witnessed the weight of the truth settling over him. The other prisoners, who had been listening intently, exchanged uneasy glances. The cupbearer reached out, placing a hand on the baker's shoulder, but neither man spoke. The room was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the faint sounds of chains rattling in the distance. As the baker withdrew into himself, I knelt in prayer once more. "Lord," I murmured, "give him peace in these final days. Let him feel your presence, even in this dark hour." It was all I could offer, but I trusted that God's hand was at work, even in this painful moment. The days that followed were marked by an air of tension and quiet anticipation. Both men waited, one with hope and the other with dread, as the 3rd day approached. I could do nothing more but watch and pray, trusting that God's will would unfold as it was meant to. 3 days later, Pharaoh's feast would reveal the truth of their dreams, setting into motion a chain of events that would change the course of my life forever. 3 days later, the day of Pharaoh's feast arrived, and the prison was abuzz with nervous energy. The cupbearer and the baker were summoned, their chains removed as they were led away. I stood silently, watching them disappear beyond the heavy iron doors. My heart was heavy, knowing that one man would find redemption while the other would meet a tragic end. As the hours passed, the sounds of celebration filtered into the prison, a distant hum of music, laughter, and the clatter of dishes. I closed my eyes, whispering a prayer for both men. "Lord, may your will be done. Comfort them and let them feel your presence, whatever their fate may be." Later that evening, the guards returned. The cupbearer walked alongside them, his face alight with joy. He had been restored to his position, just as God had revealed in the dream. I approached him eagerly, hope rising within me. "Remember me when you are free," I pleaded, my voice urgent but steady. Mention me to Pharaoh and help me out of this place." The cupbearer nodded, his expression sincere. "I will," he promised, before disappearing once more into the world beyond the prison walls. But the baker did not return. The guards spoke in hushed tones, their words confirming the dream's grim prophecy. Pharaoh had lifted off his head, and his body had been left to the birds. The reality of it hit me like a blow, a stark reminder of the weight of the interpretations I had been given. I knelt in the corner of my cell, my hands clasped tightly as I prayed for the man's soul. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Each morning, I woke with the hope that today would be the day the cupbearer remembered me. But as time stretched on, that hope began to fade. The sting of rejection was sharp, a bitter reminder that even those who owe us gratitude can forget. Yet, I refused to let bitterness take root in my heart. "God," I prayed, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest, "I trust you. Even in this silence, I know you are working for my good." The prison grew quieter with each passing day, but my resolve remained unshaken. I clung to the knowledge that God's timing is perfect, and though I could not see his plan, I believed it was unfolding just as it should. Though forgotten by man, I knew I was not forgotten by God. Little did I know, the silence of this season was preparing me for the greatest moment of my life. As the weeks turned into months, I remained in the prison, my name forgotten by the cupbearer, but never by God. The silence was a constant companion, but within it I began to find lessons I hadn't seen before. Every day was a test of patience, faith, and trust, a refining process that stripped away my doubts and fears, leaving only the core of my belief: God is faithful. Have you ever felt forgotten, as though your faithfulness was in vain? Have you stood firm in your integrity, only to feel that your sacrifices went unnoticed? The waiting can be unbearable, can't it? It's easy to wonder if our trials have any purpose, or if God has turned away. Joseph's story reminds us that God's timing is perfect. What seems like a delay is often preparation. As Isaiah 40:31 declares, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." In your waiting, know this: you are not forgotten. God sees you, hears you, and is working in ways you cannot yet understand. Trust in his timing, for what feels like a setback may be the very thing preparing you for something greater. Take heart, for the best chapters of your story are still being written.
In this chapter, Joseph found himself in prison, a place of darkness that became a stage for God's light. His faith never wavered, and through serving others, he discovered purpose even in captivity. Have you ever wondered why trials often seem to pile up? How can faith grow in the face of such overwhelming odds? Joseph's story shows us that even in the depths of despair, God's presence brings hope and strength. What will happen next? Will Joseph's gifts lead him out of prison? Or will he remain in the shadows, waiting for God's perfect timing? Join us in the next chapter as Joseph's story takes an extraordinary turn. If this chapter encouraged you, don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts. How has faith sustained you in difficult times? And subscribe to God's Story to see what's next in Joseph's journey. Joseph's life teaches us that no trial is wasted in God's hands. Even in the waiting, God is preparing us for something greater than we can imagine.